Welcome to the On the Pen podcast with your host, Dave Knapp.
Welcome to the On the Pen podcast for this Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound, that pen. We've got a doozy to get into. We just got off the call for a congressional briefing held by the Obesity Society on the topic of the safety of compounded GLP-1 medications. And this one was wild. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into a couple news stories from this week, and we're going to do it all together. But before we do, would you hit that like, hit that bell, and hit the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube? That helps to just boost what we're doing here at On the Pen. If you believe that patients deserve a platform where they can get obesity medicine news that helps them to have more competent and confident conversations with their doctors, then you're in the right place. We just ask simply that you do us the favor of engaging with the content in that way. The second thing I'm going to ask is, if you're listening on the podcast, consider giving us a 5-star rating and review. It helps to boost the podcast each and every week. But let's get into this, because this was wild. So we just sat in on a congressional briefing that was put on by the Obesity Society, an organization that deserves its flowers, right? The Obesity Society is responsible for rallying clinicians over the last almost 40 years to recognize obesity as the disease that it is, to advocate for pharmaceutical companies to develop therapies that help people from a pharmacologic standpoint get a treatment for the disease that they're living with. Without the Obesity Society, we do not have these types of conversations now, because we are all without the help that we need. So credit where credit is due. The Obesity Society is a wonderful organization, but this topic was, to say it was leaving something to be desired is a massive understatement. This congressional briefing was a one-sided, big pharma talking points, anti-compound presentation. That's essentially what it was. And unfortunately, it was to members of Congress who we will be going up to visit this week with the Obesity Action Coalition, which is a patient-centric organization to advocate for obesity. And I did hear Joe Naglowski, the president of the Obesity Action Coalition, ask a question in the end, towards the end. We'll get into that. And if you want to know more about the Obesity Action Coalition, we just had the president and CEO, Joe Naglowski, on our podcast a couple episodes back. So in our Faces of the Fight series, we've been having some great interviews. We just interviewed this past week Senator Lesser from the state of Connecticut, the architect behind this legislation that could lead to the state of Connecticut manufacturing their own version of Ozempic. Yeah, that's a wild story. Of course, we covered it here. Of course, we brought you the interview with the guy who wrote the bill, because that's what we do here. And so check out those two recent Faces of the Fight interviews. Those were super, super interesting interviews if you missed them. But this Obesity Society congressional briefing went in parallel with the release of a report from a place called the Center for Medicine in the Public Interest. And the title of the paper they put out was FDA Regulatory Failures on Enforcing Limits on GLP-1 Compounding Puts Patients at Risk, and How to Protect and Advance the Public Health through more robust regulatory oversight and timely legislative action. This report that was put out, again, it coincided with this Obesity Society congressional briefing, and the author, one of the main authors behind this, Mr. Pitts, a former FDA official apparently, was on this panel and sort of representing the data that they put forth in this report. So I'm going to link the report in the show notes. We're going to go over this on our Substack as well. You can go there by visiting obesity.news and putting in your email address. That'll make sure that you never miss an update from our our newsletter. It'll go right to your inbox. And the nice thing about it is that you never have an algorithm between us sort of dictating what you do and do not see. You'll just simply get the articles delivered directly to your inbox, and you'll be able to pick and choose what you want to listen to. So Mr. Pitts talked about foreign ingredients in this report. He talked about phony personalization schemes, very anti-personalized dosing, which I do believe is this weird gray area that we're living in right now, because the shortages are over. We've been over this. We beat this into the ground here, and now everything is moved to this 503A personalized dosing stuff, which does get objectively squirrely. You're seeing all sorts of things out there on the internet. You're seeing people being advertised these compounded medications. It is a huge money grab on the part of some of the companies that are out there. So I don't deny that. But we'll get into this a little bit later. So Peter Pitts goes on in this paper to talk about a huge spike in adverse events and overdoses. Now, one of the things that I find interesting here is this is the headline. This is like the big takeaway that kept getting hammered home. This was a 1,500% spike in adverse events tied to compound GLP-1s between 2019 and 2023. This is a 1,500% spike in calls into the, not the FAERS database, but the my mind is going blank here. Centers calls to poison control centers, right? That's what I was looking for. You should love it when a word just escapes you that much. But a 1,500% spike. Now, the obvious retort to that, and I'm glad that somebody asked this at the end, because I had a question keyed up if they were going to take questions from the virtual audience. The obvious retort to that is there's been a much larger than 1,500% increase in the use of these drugs in general in that time frame, right? Far more than 1,500%, maybe thousands of percentage higher than it was in 2019, right? And also, you have to look at the FAERS database and look at the increase in the branded versions to see if there's some intrinsic problem with compound medications. But that is not how it was presented. Not at all how it was presented. It was presented as a 1,500% spike in adverse events because compounds are inherently unsafe. That was the takeaway. It's an alarming number, and it's meant to be alarming number, but what never came up in the paper is those counterpoints to it, because again, this was a one-sided pharma hit job, because the Outsourcing Facilities Association alone, in their court filings and public statements and in conversations with On the Pen, have told us that there were 80 million doses of compound semaglutide dispensed last year alone. 80 million doses of compounds last year alone. And that's semaglutide. That's not even counting the additional maybe 30 million of tirzepatide. We're talking about over 100 million doses of compounded GLP-1s last year. Don't you think that over 100 million doses, if there was something intrinsically wrong with the API sources, with these medications, with the compounded versions, don't you think that signal is patently obvious by now? 100 million doses last year alone, even more this year. So apparently it's too much to ask to actually look at the rate of adverse events per dose when you're comparing it to branded and approved medications. But that would be the number that matters if you're trying to make the case that compounded medications are intrinsically less safe than the branded medication. Look, I respect the Obesity Society. Again, they've done critical work to legitimize this disease, to get it even recognized as a disease by the medical community, to expand access to treatment, to even have the treatments that we're talking about today. Just doesn't happen without the Obesity Society. But when you gather lawmakers and clinicians in a room and you put out public statements and you raising all this noise about compounded medications, and you bring in a former FDA voice and you have him put out a paper that you're espousing without any per dose analysis to the claims elevated, that's not actually advocacy for people living with obesity. That's ammunition for big pharma. That's all that it is. That's all that it is. It's not objective. And who gets hit? Who pays the price for that? Ultimately, when they take a headline, and you will see headlines, 1,500% increase. I mean, hopefully the media doesn't even take it seriously, because it's that obvious that there's an agenda here. But if that's the headline, 1,500% increase in adverse events because of compounded medications, who gets hurt? Patients get hurt, because that's not objective data. It's not intellectually honest data. It is actually big pharma ammunition and big pharma talking points. So who gets hurt are the millions of people at this point who actually are relying on compounds because they can't afford or access these drug treatments. And let's say Eli Lilly lowers the price to something where those people could afford the medication tomorrow. They could afford treatment. You move 100 million people, or not 100 million people, but 100 million plus doses of medication to the branded versions. There's no way that they keep up their drugs, go back into shortage, and then we're right back at square one with the compounds. So these two things need to be able to coexist if we're going to actually treat patients living with obesity with the treatments that are out there and available. If we're actually going to take this seriously as a country, listen, the future of this country rests upon the shoulders of acting on this obesity issue. The issue is so far reaching in terms of not only personal and individual health of people in this country, but in the future health of our economy, in the future health and accessibility of our entire healthcare system. We already know all of the positive benefits of these drugs. We're going to get into some of them a little bit later on this podcast. We already know the positive impacts and benefits on things like cancer and sleep apnea and heart failure and osteoarthritis. And, the list goes down the line, blood pressure, right? We're learning new indications every day, because when you fix the disease of obesity, when you fix the metabolic dysfunction that is going on in somebody's body, you fix so many cascading issues. And just imagine the ripple effects throughout our healthcare system and our economy if we can effectively treat these people. When we talk about the future of our country, this is a nonpartisan issue. Treating the disease of obesity is a non-starter. We have to do it. And it's going to take an all of government approach, and it's going to take an all of manufacturing approach. Do we need to maybe weave in some more safeguards for patients? Yeah, we do. Do we need to maybe have some policy around how these drugs can be marketed? How they can be manufactured and sold? Yes, we do. Those are policy decisions and debates that we should have, but we should not have policy and debates presented one-sided by a advocacy organization that are simply talking points for big pharma. That's all I'm asking, is for a straight conversation. Like, having these people up there is just as ridiculous as having, an industry organization like the OFA or the APC up there sharing their side of the story. It's one-sided. We need an objective conversation. We need to be hearing from the millions of patients. Put it in the comments of this video if you're somebody who has gotten your life back because of compounded medications, because those are the stories that are not being told. And we've gone to Capitol Hill and we've been trying to tell it, but we are one little news outlet, right? So anyways, people who live in states where their insurance still won't cover GLP-1s, who are paying $600-700 out of pocket for these medications for the branded options, who finally have found something that's working, like that's the person that gets hurt by something like this. And the briefing had all the right players in the room: doctors, pharmacists, research, policy staffers. But the question that I have is, where were the patients? Where were the patients? Just, these industry experts up there pontificating, but you don't hear from a single person that says, yeah, you know what? I used to weigh 600 pounds and now I'm down into 300 pounds. I can walk up the stairs. I can move around. I can help myself. I can take care of myself. Where were those stories? Because they're out there. They're out there. I hear from them every day. We've got some of them in our book. So if we're going to talk about safety, we've got to have good context. We've got to ask real questions, and we've got to have an honest conversation. This was not it. This was not it, and left something to be desired. I hope the Obesity Society will engage people like myself and others on the advocacy front and really get an honest look at this compounding conversations. There's a tension right now between big pharma, between these advocacy organizations and the compounders. And listen, I don't think anybody's hands are clean. This is all about money. But at the end of the day, from the patient side, we're not in this tug of war. All we want is treatment for our chronic disease, and people deserve that, and they deserve access to it. And so we should have honest conversations about the safety. We should have honest conversations about protecting the future innovation of drugs. These are all honest conversations we should have, but we can't have them when we're just completely intellectually dishonest. And that is what this felt like from the patient perspective. So if we get the chance to, we may put that up on the YouTube channel. I'm not sure if we have the ability to do that or not, especially after I just kind of sort of took down, my take on it. But anyway, we're going to move on because there's a lot of great news to get into this week. If you missed out, obesity.news, you could have gotten some of these articles earlier this week. I do want to take a pause though and thank our sponsors, Roe. Roe is the company that brings this podcast to you each and every week. They have a program called the Roe Body Program, which helps you get access to these medications when it's medically necessary. And patients on the Roe Body Program lose 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year when coupled with lifestyle modifications, appropriate medicine when prescribed and is necessary. Listen, if you're going to be a part of any program, if you want to get access to the branded medications, Roe has a great program that'll help you do just that. They have patient advocates that fight for accessibility on the insurance side each and every day. They're very adept at getting coverage for the branded medications. Of course, you can get the Lilly vials for Zepbound right through the Roe platform. You never even have to leave the Roe app. You can get the Wegovy pricing through NovoCare as well. So you're going to want to check out row.co/OTP to learn more. Let them know that we sent you there from the podcast. They're such a wonderful sponsor here, and we're so thankful for them. Also, if you're someone who is looking at getting branded medication, maybe through your own provider, I hope that you'll look at our other sponsor, Claimable. Now, Claimable is a company. We just had their CEO on a couple days ago. They were just on CNBC yesterday because they're blowing up because what they're offering is just amazing. You can go to getclaimable.com/OTP. Use code OTP10 to save 10% when they help you put together your case to fight your insurance company for coverage on GLP-1 medications. So many of you are denied by your insurance companies. Claimable comes in. They help you assemble a good medical and legal case that then they will also submit on your behalf to all the stakeholders involved, your insurance company, perhaps even some of your legislatures, all of those things they do all within their app. It's a one-stop shop and it's helping people every day. I'm hearing another story about somebody who's getting coverage through Claimable and using that service. So you can use code OTP10 when you go there. Go to getclaimable.com/OTP. It'll take you right to the GLP-1 page and use code OTP10 to save 10%. Thank you, Claimable, for helping to bring this podcast to the community as well. Now, a couple stories that were very interesting this week, sort of both sides of the coin here. So some stunning news came out of Endo 2025. Now, for those of you who don't know what Endo 2025 is, the Endo conference is one of the largest conferences in the world for endocrinologists. And we brought you last week some amazing information about how GLP-1s might be protecting the heart after a heart attack or after a low oxygen event. It relaxed the capillaries in the heart and restored blood flow, potentially reversed some microvascular damage. Now, this headline out of Endo, and we covered it on the pen, was about some research done at the University of Michigan using a well-established model for obesity-associated breast cancer. So mice were essentially fed a high-fat diet to induce obesity, then implanted with breast cancer tumors in the mammary fat pad. And it's a model that sort of mimics the way that obesity fuels cancer cell growth in breast cancer in women. So once the mice were fully obese and tumor positive, they were given Zepbound or placebo every other day for 16 weeks. And mice on Zepbound lost about 20% of their body fat. Their tumor volume dropped alongside the fat loss. And especially if they lost fat in their livers, those cancer tumors shrunk quite a bit. So this preclinical data, it's in mice. So you never know how that's going to translate. But it does look like there is a potential thing to explore for science to show that tirzepatide may have an impact on the size of breast cancer tumors and being able to help shrink them, at least in mice. Now, hopefully they'll explore this more. Now, the flip side of that coin is another story that came out, and we didn't cover this back in March, but it was brought to our attention this past week. And this is a study over semaglutide. So the last one I talked about was tirzepatide. That's GLP-1 GIP. So different effects on the body slightly, right? But semaglutide study in a study that was done at the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics, a clinic that I have personally been seen in, and my children and my wife have been seen at. This study actually suggests that semaglutide could potentially accelerate certain neuroendocrine tumors. So if you're feeling a little whiplash from one news story to the other, that's what it's like to sort of be at the frontier of new medicine, where the same class of drug can sort of be both a miracle and a question mark. And we want to cover all sides. We don't, it's not all rainbows and butterflies all the time. We want to cover information that empowers you to have more competent and confident conversations with your doctors. And sometimes that means that the news isn't always what we want to hear. So this is important to put in context, and we will. But in this March 2025 studies, researchers at the University of Iowa actually showed that certain tumors that are called neuroendocrine tumors. So they looked at 6 models of neuroendocrine tumor cells. Half of them had high levels of GLP-1 receptors. So these are tumors that actually have GLP-1 receptors within their cells. And that's the same receptors that are binded to by like semaglutide or the GLP-1 agonists out there, like liraglutide or dulaglutide or any of those previous versions that were straight GLP-1 receptor agonists. So when those cells were exposed to semaglutide, the tumor lines showed 19 and 22% faster growth in the lab. And in mice implanted with one of those 2 tumors, semaglutide actually led to a 72% increase in the tumor size. So that's pretty significant. And if it's causing you to kind of go, whoa, and pause, it probably should, right? But we do need context. So here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that GLP-1s cause this cancer. These are really rare tumors. And this is in, a lab setting with mice and cells. And so this is not in human studies. So this study didn't show that GLP-1s cause this. But it's important information nonetheless, right? It wasn't a human trial. This was cell models in mice. And neuroendocrine tumors are actually very rare, and only some of them actually express GLP-1 receptors. This was specifically, again, looking at the ones that express GLP-1 receptors. So it's already out there, right? If you've read the fine print on GLP-1 medications, they already carry a black box warning for medullary thyroid cancer, another rare endocrine tumor. That warning's always been there, but it's been more of like a safe than sorry warning, in my opinion. This is my non-medical guy on YouTube on a podcast opinion. But it's always been more than a safe than sorry situation based upon the animal studies, because it was only seen in the clinical trials in those early stage rodents that were fed but introduced to high doses of these GLP-1s. And there's also been strong post-marketing data that has compared millions of patients at this point who have been on different diabetes medications, frontline diabetes medications, and GLP-1s, and they've found no correlation in an increased risk for medullary thyroid cancer for developing it, right? But this study is actually showing for those who possess it, it's possible that they need to look into whether semaglutide could help those tumors to grow, because they do show that now in rodents and in cell models. So these are some things that I think are just important to be aware of. These are some things that I think are important to be mindful of, but not always something that's going to necessarily translate to the human world. It looks like we maybe lost the camera feed on the stream on YouTube, so I apologize for that. We've been having some fun technical difficulties here at the office today, but I wanted to get the podcast out because we are going to be going to Washington, D.C. this week. We're going to have some great content for you. I'm really looking forward to it. We have a meetup that we're hosting at the Top Golf there on, I believe, Thursday. I could be getting that wrong, so don't look at the email. Don't take my word for it. But it's going to be really fun. I'm really excited to do some advocacy work up on the Hill, to work with our friends at the Obesity Action Coalition. I think that it's going to be a wonderful week. I'm looking forward to bringing you some content there. Thank you to our sponsors, and thank you to you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen. I wouldn't, and shouldn't do it without you. Thank you for being the best part of what we do here at On the Pen, and we will catch you on the next one.